Hi, welcome back to Malone Hatley's podcast, I Now Pronounce You Divorced, where we discuss all things family law related, whether it's issues or concerns we're going through or questions that you've dropped to us and we want to be able to address. And today we're joined by Rebecca Melone and we have a guest, Andy Patzig, out of our Northern Virginia office. Rebecca, welcome. And Andy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For those who are tuning in and listening, maybe just briefly introduce yourself and talk about what got you into coaching.
Yeah. So I'm Andy Patzig, litigation attorney here in the Reston office of Malone Hatley. Been a divorce attorney for a long time, but what got me into divorce coaching was that I've seen a lot of clients who came to me, weren't sure of the process, which is natural, but also not sure whether they were vested in the process. They didn't know if this is the right course for them. They didn't know if they, were ready for this. And when they come to me as an attorney, sometimes it's frustrating because in the attorney hat, I'm ready to move forward. But they don't always need that. That's not what the client needs necessarily. So I started looking into what other things are out there. I'd already been trained in mediation, so I'm familiar with the idea of, kind of walking softly through this process. And I really like the idea of divorce coaching and getting people ready to understand the process and then setting a goal and not just doing this reactively, but proactively walking through the divorce.
Wonderful.
So, in pursuing your coaching venture, did it make you more aware of any gaps on the legal side? Was it like, oh, this is what's been missing? Or did you kind of know what to expect getting into it?
I think to some degree I knew what to expect because of my experience as an attorney. A lot of divorce coaches aren't coming from the attorney perspective. Because quite frankly, in Virginia, you can just kind of call yourself a divorce coach because you've been divorced or somebody is divorced. But having walked through, the process, talking to other divorce coaches, doing the training, I did realize that there's some gaps. It's, even to the point where as an attorney, we call them opposing counsel. That by itself, when I'm meeting with somebody who's talking about coaching, I say the other counsel because it just takes that adversary role out. And I think as attorneys, we just tend to look at it, even if we're not really adversarial, that's them and we're over here and we're both kind of clashing over something, as opposed to we can do this as a team in a way.
One of the benefits I feel that you are able to provide clients, you have that mediation background, you have the coaching background. How does that with the coaching background really affect the way that you're advising clients to make decisions?
I think one of the biggest ways is, like I mentioned briefly before, but being proactive instead of reactive, because so much of what we see is emotional in our clients, right? And it's natural. I mean, I've been through my own divorce and I get where the feelings are coming from, but you can't let that guide you, especially in my biggest concern is when kids are involved, because these people have kids the rest of their lives, hopefully, and they've got divorces or they've got marriages to go to, weddings, birthdays, and you don't want a child to pick. So what I like to say, and I didn't invent the phrase, but you can either have a divorce focused on kids or kids focused on divorce. And I think that's really something I can do as a divorce coach and look forward to is how can I maintain that relationship and build it where as an attorney, I may think about the kids, but that's not my client. I want to protect them, but that's not my client. But as a divorce coach, I can really look forward to what their goals are with the kids, what they want to accomplish, and not just look at on paper or tell the story, but we're looking farther down the road to maintain that relationship in a healthy way so that, this can be done quicker, cheaper, but more importantly, less stressful for everybody.
So, along with that, a lot of the time in divorces, we see people making decisions based out of fear, based out of, trying to win, trying to get the upper
Mhm.
hand. So, how does coaching kind of play a role in slowing down or maybe bringing some more analysis
Right.
to the legal side?
And that's a great question, and I think critical for divorce coaching. What it really lends is that we sit down often before the process even starts. So we're talking about, okay, you're thinking about divorce. It's this first of all, the right way. Do you want to get us, are you separated? Do you need to be separated? But then we think about what are the goals, and I'm not looking at this as a counselor or therapist. I'm not worried about the emotions behind it and resolving those. That's not my role. My role is now we're moving forward. How do we set goals? And what are our terms? What are our lines that we're willing to cross and not cross? And so we know way before we ever get to it, if it comes down to the house, have we thought about what the future looks like if we keep the house and what our needs are, long term planning for retirement? Is the house really, is it an emotional attachment you have, or does it make more sense to stay in the house? Because so many people, I wanted to stay in the house. That's what me and the kids grew up. But does it make sense financially to stay in the house? So we start thinking about those things early on and set our goals. And we can lay out a plan much better than, as we go through the divorce and say, okay, well, we've got custody, equitable distribution, visitation. Those are issues. Let's, attack them. We lay out a plan, and it can work towards goals and goal setting and meeting with clients to make sure that they understand what their goals are, and kind of remind them, even if they had an emergency quick call, like, okay, she just called me and said, or he just called me and said XYZ. Right. Okay. We know we can't control the other party, no matter what we do, whether it's coaching, divorcing, mediation, we have no control over that. What we control is our response. And so we work on that, again, reflecting back on what the goals and what we're trying to attain from this divorce so that we can come through and start our, life 2.0 on the other end of this in a healthy way. And so that a divorce coaching really lets me focus on that kind of real people element and being proactive about this for the health of everybody involved.
And that's so well said, because you want to make sure we're establishing goals and constantly talk about them, what we need to do to get to that point. And maybe there's going to be some obstacles. But what about that emotional side that we were talking about in the very beginning? Are there any emotional traps that you've seen that may derail this legal strategy or these goals that are in place?
Yeah, I think it's only natural when you're talking about something like divorce that emotions are going to be high. It's rare that we don't see that. But one of the things we talk about when we're talking about emotions is, being able to try and regulate where you're going to be and anticipate. So, there's a path you can go down, and you can think about that ahead of time, because we kind of know, especially as a divorce attorney, I know some of the traps are going to be, what happens when your ex says they want now sole custody. Okay, that might be an ask, but that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. So we're prepared for that. We're talked through the strategies. We talk through the different roads that this may take. So, like a tree, we're not going just straight up and down and have all these branches. And we can talk about what happens on those branches ahead of time so that when those emotions come up, we're not making a decision at that point. We can discuss it and discuss, okay, well, then what branch do we need to be on? We've already laid out some strategies here. Now, how does this apply to what your goals are? We don't need to just suddenly say, well, now I want sole custody. Okay. We stay on the path. If you believe shared is the right path, then that's what we stay on, because we're not now responding to something that just came up and is going to derail the whole process for one issue that probably is emotional on the other side too, and just reacting emotionally. Like I said, the reaction is not as good as proaction. And so we really focus on that.
So you bring something up that I think a lot of people are not prepared for, and that is, in their case, you usually have to ask for more than what you actually want, right?
Mhm.
Once you've put pen to paper and put something with the court that says, "I want this," you can't later go in and say, "But now I want more." You can
Yeah.
always get less, but you can't go back and get more, right? So with your example of asking for sole legal custody, sometimes people just throw that in there because they want to keep their options open. They don't know what's going to happen between the time today when I file and the time, a year from now, 18 months from now, when I'm actually going to go to trial and have to make a decision at that point. So, does coaching also play in with setting those expectations so your client doesn't have a panic attack when someone says, "I want all of the retirement, I want all of the house, I want sole
Right.
legal custody, I want,
Yeah.
I want everything and then some," because that's the legal strategy, right?
Right.
And we have to deal with the paperwork in one way, and we have to deal with our actual strategy and what we really want kind of
Mhm.
behind the
Yeah.
scenes almost.
No, that's a great question, Rebecca. And I think that, goes right to the heart of it, which is, again, the coaching is the planning. And so from day one, again, with my background in law, I can explain what the process is going to look like and how this actually works in a courtroom as opposed to what I've heard or what I've seen. But I know, they're going to probably ask for more than, 50%. They're going to ask for more than, equitable distribution because, again, what we're putting on paper is not what we're stuck with. And I know that. And so I can counsel clients on a coaching basis like, look, just because they say it's fault based, we don't necessarily have to respond to that. You can think about what your goals are. And yeah, they may claim fault based, it may get them in court sooner, there may be other reasons. But at the end of the day, this can be a no fault, 12-month separation. It doesn't necessarily dictate the ask is not necessarily the answer that comes out at the end of this. And so you've got to separate those two. And again, like we just talked about, the emotions in play, the other party may be coming fresh off some real pain or hurt. And so, yeah, their ask is really high. They want everything. They want to punish, and that's what it's about. And so just the ask by itself is punishing the other party. And so my client may, naturally is going to go, well, I can't believe they want this. But again, it can be just because they want to punish you. They could be being advised to ask for everything and ask for the sky and see where you get. Shoot for the stars. Maybe you'll get something close. But again, we start from day one, explaining what their expectations are, setting the goals for those expectations, and then kind of creating a pathwork for how they can guide themselves through that with some encouragement and help from me. But this is really to let them know where their path is going to be so they can travel that.
We always want to make sure we're educating our clients so they can make the most informed decisions because to all points that have been made, they could be emotional or reactive and not necessarily strategic thinking. How does someone, whether it's you in your unique role because you have this background, or if we bring on someone who is a coach, what does that framework look like to really kind of start educating the client on, okay, this is the role that this coach is playing, and this is how it's going to affect decisions moving forward and how we can be supportive for you?
Well, I personally have, some documents, a lot of intake, more than I do as a divorce attorney, because I need to get that information, right off the bat. But I've also actually written a book that's on Amazon called Deliberate Dissolution, which is about the process of going through this and working towards an amicable solution. And that really kind of coincides. So, whether my client wants to buy it or whether I get it to them, but the point being that there are guides out there, and I try to provide that information as a divorce coach to know what that structure is going to look like because it's much different. And so I lay out the different steps that are involved, the different processes we may take, different techniques that can be at play. And I really spell this out at the beginning so the client has expectations, but knows too, this is not going to be one straight path, through that. There's going to be some rocks, there's going to be some hurdles and some detours. And if I lay that out ahead of time, what those expectations are, what I've seen in my experience, because again, if I'm the divorce coach, I'm not going to be their regular attorney because I need those roles to be separate. And certainly one of my colleagues can handle the divorce, but that's not my role. And my client needs to understand I'm here to guide and support. I'm not here to give them that legal acumen and direction. But I think that laying that out, giving them clear definitions and understanding of the process from, even sure you want to get divorced. And then if you make that decision, what is next? So there's like a decision tree that they need to go through. And I walk them through that very clearly from day one.
That's such a good way to handle it. I was thinking about you're talking about moving between your hats, right?
Mhm.
I'm wearing my coaching hat now and I'm giving you this advice as a coach. I'm wearing my legal hat now and I'm giving you this, as my
Right.
legal advice. And there's so many times when as attorneys we have to walk that line where
Mhm.
someone's asking us about, tax implications of a certain transaction or someone's asking us about, other sort of real world things and we have to say, "Okay, pause. This is my legal advice. However, my life advice is,
Right.
you need to consider X, Y, and Z." How do you make sure that you're kind of balancing between those two roles and you don't have coaching clients that slip into legal advice or legal clients that kind of slip into being coaching clients?
Right. It can be tricky, but as a divorce coach, it's the same way we have here at Malone Hatley, where we kind of keep a list of other external resources for our clients to be a one stop for them to get what they need. And I kind of treat it the same way. So attorneys are another resource. And I try and focus as I'm talking to clients, like this is now on this list over here of things I'm not going to do for them. And that's one of them. And I just think about what the goal is in these meetings. It's for me to help them help themselves through the process. It's not to tell them what to do. And as soon as I start telling them as an attorney, I'm kind of crossing that role and crossing that line. I'm now no longer a coach. I'm just directing them what to do. And that's not the role I want to be in. That's not what they hired me to be in. And that's not the help they need right now. They can get that from somebody else.
Don't you sometimes want that though? Aren't you
Oh, yeah.
sometimes just like, let me make your decisions for you,
Right. Just to
just
be
for a little while. I struggle with that sometimes too, where I'm like, oh, I just want you to, and that, no, okay,
right.
legally, my opinion is this, and it's your life, and you have to make your choices. But sometimes I just want to jump in for a little while and make the choice for you.
Absolutely. I also have a line of T-shirts for lawyers, and one of them says, "I've read both your text messages, and you're both wrong." That's kind of where I want to come. Sometimes is like, look, you're not handling this well. But as
Mhm.
a divorce coach, I get to look at that from a different perspective and be like, okay, what can we learn from this? How can we now change our attitude and tone so we can increase and improve this process? Because we know where we want to get to. Whereas an attorney, I'd tell them, look, you got to just knock this off because it's not healthy. But yeah, it's sometimes a struggle. But I'm sure there's times when, you're right up on that line as an attorney. But I really try and separate those two consciously.
And preparing for this, and I was laughing because I've been in those situations as well. I'm sure you can tell the difference between a well-prepared client that may have had some form of a coaching
Uh-huh.
in their case, and one that's not. Is there a preference you have, or can you tell the difference when maybe one side has brought on a coach and the other side is maybe having these unrealistic expectations that we've been talking about?
Yeah, as long as we delineate when we say coach, we're not talking about Google and their best friend, because we do get a lot of that. Well, Google said, or AI in these days, AI is their representative. Yeah, so, there's also, sorry, let me back up. So divorce coaching is a form of alternative dispute resolution, ADR. And there's a lot of different forms of ADR, but some of them are, this idea that we're going to do this divorce with a team and we'll have accountants and we'll do all this stuff. And so some people who come from that perspective already of, hey, I've read about this. I think collaborative of divorce is the right approach for me. Then that's great because now I can help them process that whole big thing because they've read about it, they heard about it. But if they've gotten some actual coaching, then it really helps, I think, the process because they understand what their needs are. They're not coming to it cold, not knowing. It's still kind of unheard of. People are like divorce coaches. It sounds very new age-ish, but it's a real goal-driven process, and it's very much an expertise. And it's something kind of like the practice of law where we're always practicing and getting better. There's always new techniques, there's new ideas. But I like when somebody has an idea of what they're coming into. It just makes it easier, I think, to have a softer landing on the idea of going forward in a healthy way to maintain your sanity as opposed to let's get what my fair share of everything. So yeah.
So when you're dealing with these clients who have, I tease sometimes at my doctor's office that Dr. Google told me, that this is what's going on. And I sort of teasingly will say that, but we definitely have people who come in, they've read Google, they've read blogs, they've seen Facebook posts, they've talked to Chat GPT, they've, had family members
Mhm.
with these horror stories, but they're from California and they live in Virginia. What are some of those sort of conceptions or some of those more frequently asked, wrong things that clients are coming in with when they're facing a divorce?
I think there's some real deliberate disinformation. I think out there. I think some of it is just vague. I think some of it's wrong, but some of the things in Virginia, I hear a lot of from male clients that the Virginia court's just unfair to guys. It's always been that way. It's always going to be that way. And I have to explain, there was a time that was very true in Virginia. We had the tender years doctrine, but that's not the case anymore. We've got new judges who weren't even on the bench at that time who've come up in a much different environment than what those judges did. And so, it's about putting your best case forward. It's not about whether you're the man or the woman, the mother, the father. That's not the basis anymore. And yes, you may have some judge with a little bit of personal bias because we're all people, but I had not had a case where I felt that was truly the situation with a judge. And a lot of people also come in thinking, well, we agree on everything, so this is definitely going to be done in no time, 6 months. Well, one, they want it done right now, so that the time frame, what it takes, 6 months if you have an agreement. But that's not always the golden ticket. People don't always understand that the other party might say they're in agreement, they might be mostly in agreement. But then one little thing, because they don't have that goal set, and the whole thing falls apart, because they're being reactive again. And so that becomes a big issue. The idea of, you know, they talk to somebody, the other party talked to somebody of the opposite sex, so it's adultery. A lot of people misunderstand what adultery means, what it's taken to prove, and what it gets them at the end. And so again, that's an emotional driven response. And I'm not saying there's not a basis for it, and Virginia certainly allows for it. But again, are you asking for that because you want to punish? Or are you asking that for a purpose? Because if we're talking punishment, we're talking about a whole different line. We're not talking about the legal process anymore. And I want to help you get through the legal process as your divorce coach. I'm not here just to reinforce, yeah, you should be angry. That's great. Let's hate them and wish bad juju and take them off the Christmas card list. That's not my role. My role is to better the situation. And so I really have to sit down and talk to people about that. Those are some of the bigger issues I think I run into on a regular basis.
I would think, speaking of bigger issues, especially from the lens of a coach, how do you shift from that spouse to co-parenting? And what's that mindset that you really start advising these clients to start thinking about and focusing on?
Yeah. So, thinking about co-parenting when they've been a parent for, who knows how long, it could have been, 18 years now, and the kid's almost 18. So it's a long time where they've done this together, but there was some point where they disagreed. And so you've got to think about that going forward is, you're both going to be a parent and you need to work together. But at the same time, you have some autonomy. So you get to parent the way you need to parent or the way you feel you should be parenting without being necessarily bound, but at the same time being respectful. And so the important part there is you both have strengths and weaknesses. Now that you're separated, you can really try and focus on giving your kids the strength portion of you. They don't have to see the weaknesses, and what caused the fighting. You can focus together on just bringing out the best of yourself. You don't have to worry about the best of the other party. That's up to them. But you have that goal of what you want for your kids. You want to be able to both be at the wedding. So what does that take? That you can both be in that same room. Does it mean that you have to bite your tongue a couple times or you internalize some things? It may. But we talk about that way early in the process so that they can start doing that. But, some of the common things they have to think about are, what are vacations going to look like now? It's going to be a much different environment. There's going to be less people involved and they're going to have less time. So they need to think about how they're going to schedule that. And, one of the other things that I extend when I'm talking about parenting time is grandparents. Because in Virginia, people want to involve the grandparents. Grandparents have no rights in the Virginia court, really. And so, okay, well, how are you going to, if you want your parents involved, the grandparents, how are you going to do that? What's your vacation time going to look like? Can you schedule, do you need to rotate your holidays different because your parents, the grandparents are going to another kid's house? And so you want to think about those things early on is how does that schedule going to work with the entire family if that's important to you? You've got to take all those things into consideration early on in the process. Whereas maybe, we're thinking, okay, well, we'll just deal with it as we get to it. It needs to be very spelled out. That's the other thing is details matter. I think the place where we get into a lot of roadblocks and a lot of issues is when people don't lay out a real good plan for how this is going to work. They expect everything to work either really well because it's working well now, or it's always going to be bad because it's bad now. And nobody ever thinks about, okay, but 3 years from now, what's it going to look like if I'm remarried, she's remarried, he's remarried, whoever is remarried or moves. So you've got to anticipate those things not anticipate meaning plan for them, but plan for the allowance of them so that you have some flexibility. But keep in mind, when you're co-parenting, it's about the best interest of the kids. And like I said before, You can focus on them now, or they can be stuck focusing on their divorce. What do you want them to do? And you just need to be conscious of their best interest and fighting for that as part of what you want, and not just letting yourself steamroll what's best for your kids.
So, what are some of the tools that your coaching clients need or need some help with to sort of bring that back around into focus? To get them from being antagonistic with the other parent to we
Mhm.
need to focus on the children, we need to avoid or reduce this sort of high conflict communication that we're having. What are some of the tools to kind of redirect that thinking?
Yeah. So one is when I'm meeting with my clients, I create a space so that they can kind of get all this toxic energy out, and just kind of vent it. Because sometimes it's just about being heard. We know, a lot of clients in court, they just want their day in court. A lot of parents just want to know that they're being heard, and they feel wrong, and that's important to them to identify that. So as part of that too, though, I encourage all my clients to journal. That's one of the first things I give them is a blank journal and pen, and I want you to start writing this stuff down and reflect on it, because no good decisions are going to be made in the moment. And so we need to be able to write those down, think about those, and then talk about how that fits in with the goal going forward. Rephrase, the issues that you're getting from the other party, to look at the other perspective. I'm not saying we have to always agree or say, yeah, okay, fine, we're conceding, but look at it from the other party's perspective, just briefly, to see if you can understand what the response is driven by. Because if they're responding by fear, anger, or something else, and you do the same, you can see where this is just you're gonna meet in the middle and clash, and nothing's gonna get resolved. So trying to understand that motivation, even if there's nothing you can do about it, I really try and focus on that. And then just kind of, again, stick with the plan. I think that's the most important. Is when we create that roadmap, is making sure you have buy-in from the client, that they can champion for their own cause and keep going, and have that momentum. No matter what happens, there's a path forward, and to know that. But sticking to those two things, the journaling so they have an idea of what's happening with them right now, and the goal so they can see the long term, and checking on the progress. Because sometimes people lose track of what they've actually gotten so far. If they've gone out to the movies by themselves and you've had somebody who's, stayed at home the whole time because this is so tough for them, that's a win. They need to understand that. And there's going to be wins along the way, just like there's going to be losses along the way. Now, when I say losses, I'm not talking legal, but things that are hard, things that they hadn't planned on. A holiday comes up, and now they always went to their in-laws, and now they're not. And it's sad. And the kids are this year with, the other party. And so, yeah, it's a whole different process. But again, what is it you're trying to achieve? And so I really reflect back on that. It's a lot of reflection, a lot of goal setting, and a lot of just journaling about how they're feeling about it, and then creating that space for them to talk about it and get it out. And then we reflect. And, if we need to pivot, we'll pivot. But this is about making sure they get to where they want to go in the way that they want to get there, and keep that sanity.
But you've given a lot of great advice for what it looks like going through the process, and I know we're coming up on time, but what does it look like when a lawyer brings on a coach? And lawyers are a lot of times resistant to change or trying something different, right? Because they're just
Right.
so sometimes pigeonholed, and this is how it has to be. But I think it's a great idea bringing on a coach. How can attorneys and coaches collaborate together without kind of stepping on each other's toes, or maybe confusing the client on what their roles are?
Right. I think that's a great question, Dan. So, one of the things that really kind of makes me recognize in an attorney before I even started this is that divorce coaching can have a real role. Is some of the things we deal with as divorce attorneys are kind of outside our lane. We don't really expect to sit down and plan out everything about these clients' lives, or hear everything about the clients' lives, and be able to tell them this is what you should do. When a lot of clients ask it, what should I do now? And we can tell them, well, here are your legal options, but that's not exactly what they want, maybe. And so, that's where the divorce coach comes in, is they can talk about those things. They can talk about what options look like without saying this is what you should do, or without making it so cold and just calculated. Okay, let's look, let's think about 5 years from now. What would that look like if you did this? What would it look like if this happened? And plan for those types of things. Think about the different processes, and even say things like, "Are you sure? It doesn't even sound like you want to be divorced. Are you sure you want to do that?" Because as a divorce attorney, we don't always, I try to, but sometimes we're focused on the end result. And as a divorce coach and having a divorce coach, it's not necessarily just about the end result; it's about that journey. Whereas the attorney can focus on the end result, getting into court, or getting that MSA done, whatever needs to be done. The divorce coach is there to make sure that that client stays sane, transitions easily, and can help offload some of those concerns and debilitating kind of freakouts the client may have about just the stress and everything else. That's the divorce coach's role. And as a divorce coach, same thing. I mean, like I said, I would say most. I was going to change it to many, but I would say most are not attorneys. And so it's easier for them not to step in that role. For me, it's about having and knowing that, again, it doesn't matter who the attorney is as long as they respect what role. And I'll talk to them early on, look, I'm not, especially if they see I'm an attorney, I'm not trying to overstep this. I want to stay in my role. In this case, I'm not involved in that part at all. My goal here is to work with the client and try and achieve, set some goals. And then if you have questions about how those look, we'll get on the phone.
Right.
So I have one client up in Connecticut. I've talked to his family law attorney several times just to reiterate, because my client can talk to me and explain things to me. And then he's a rambler. He doesn't want to get on the phone and spend 2 hours of an attorney billable time because they're different rates. And he'll be like, "Can you just talk to my attorney? We'll get on a three-way call, like you're not in lieu of, but can you just kind of explain what it is I want to achieve here?" Yeah, let's do that. And in that case, the attorney is very open to it because it helps him understand where the client's coming from, and he can do his job better because
Right.
he knows and understands better what the client is needing.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again for taking time to speak with us. This is such a unique topic. And, one of the many things that separates different firms, especially ours, is the way that we approach clients and strategy, and having that
Mhm.
holistic approach sometimes can be a difference, right? Because you're going through an emotionally charged process, and bringing on a third party can help move that case forward and try to achieve goals that you're setting in the beginning. So Annie, thanks for taking time. Rebecca, thanks for joining us today. And those who are listening, thank you again. We really appreciate everyone listening, sending in your questions. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, give us a chance, call us, and allow Malone Hatley to meet with you, and we can discuss what the options are and hopefully move forward from there. But please keep these
Absolutely.
positive reviews coming in, and we look forward to talking to you all later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Rebecca.